Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello, Clarence House.
Oh, hello. I'm getting married next year, and I understand you're licensed to hold weddings at the hotel.
Yes, we are. Can I ask what date you were thinking of?
Either the 1st or the 7th of June?
Right, let me see. Oh, I'm afraid we already have a booking for the 7th, but we still have availability on June the 1st.
That would be fine.
So, how many guests are you going to be inviting?
About 80.
So, for that number, we'd recommend the Oxford Suite. I don't know if you've been to the hotel.
Yes. In fact, I went to a wedding there a few years ago, and I was really impressed.
Very good.
I think we were in the Oxford Suite then. The room where we were eating had big windows with really good views. You could see right across the city.
That's it. And you'd have exclusive access to the garden. It'll be at its best in June.
So we could have the photos there.
Sure. In fact, you can even have the ceremony there if you want. It makes a lovely background.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yes, that's certainly an idea. And is there somewhere for dancing?
Yes, there's plenty of space in the middle of the dining room.
Oh, yeah, I remember now.
So, just to give you an idea, would you like me to tell you about our special wedding package?
Sure.
Right. So, for 80 guests, you'd have the exclusive use of the Oxford Suite, as I said, and then a meal, so that would be in the dining room, and that would be a sit-down meal with 3 courses.
And how's the room arranged? I seem to remember you have round tables.
That's right. Most people prefer them to long tables.
Long tables aren't really very friendly, are they? And what about decorations on the tables?
They're included in the package, and we have white linen tablecloths and white chair covers. And we also include an individually designed menu specially printed for you. It's something that people can take away to remember the occasion. That's something we've just started doing this year.
All right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
And then, towards the end of the evening, when everyone's beginning to run out of energy, we bring in a buffet. Nothing too complicated, just a selection of sandwiches together with tea or coffee. That's always very popular.
Right. And we want some music. Is that included in the package?
No, but we could probably get you a DJ, or we know of a very good band if you'd prefer that.
Yes, that'd be better actually. Something to get everyone on their feet. Good. So, apart from the music, you said that's an all-inclusive package. So, how much does that package come to?
£5,995.
That's a bit more than the package they quoted for me at the Stanley Hotel. Theirs was £4,500.
Yes, but I think if you look at what you're getting for the money, you'll find we're the best value. And it is a big day after all.
Yes, you're probably right. Oh, and I nearly forgot. I'm looking for someone who can make me a really special cake. Can you suggest one?
Certainly. There's a new company that we've started using. They're very good. In fact, our wedding coordinator will be able to give you all sorts of advice. We can offer you a free consultation and a tour of the venue.
Yes, well, I'd definitely be interested.
Right. Well, the coordinator's name is Sarah Izzard. That's Izzard. Now, when would you like to meet her? She's available from 9 to 5 most weekdays, or later if that's more convenient.
I'm free on the 12th of October, in the morning sometime, or the 15th of October.
That would be better, thanks. Shall we say 11:30?
Fine.
And can I just take your name and a contact number?
Sure, it's Debbie.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
Section 2. You have some time to look at questions 11 to 16.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll give you a bit of background to the museum and then tell you about some of the galleries. You probably won't have time to see everything today, so what I recommend you do is go to the Egyptian room first, because it's everyone's favourite place and it gets very crowded with the school parties later in the day. Oh, and I should mention that the photography gallery is undergoing refurbishment at the moment, so while that's definitely worth seeing, it'll have to wait for another time. Now, the actual museum building itself is quite interesting. It was designed by a local architect called William Craven in the 19th century, at a time when the city was developing rapidly, with new factories to cope with the expansion of the textile industry. The museum's built in a very similar style to the railway station, which was constructed at around the same time. That was designed by another architect, but William Craven did also provide the plans for the town hall, which was built just a few years later. Construction of the museum began in 1888 with a large team of carpenters, stonemasons, and builders. Then, in recent years, it's been extensively refurbished. The lovely big windows have been retained to let the daylight flood in, but the award-winning part of the project was the restoration of the area around the central hall. In particular, the beautiful wrought iron staircase, which was brought back to its former glory. Unfortunately, the museum's original tiled floor had to be replaced with new tiles of a similar design. It was a very expensive project, and since we don't charge admission fees, we had to find other ways of funding it. We did get some money from the Department of Culture at national level, but we had even more generous support from companies and industries here in the city who were our main benefactors. However, we do also depend on donations from people living in the area for the ongoing maintenance of the building. So, how will the museum mainly be spending its money in the next 5 years? We already work with schools and colleges, helping people get a better understanding of all the creative disciplines. We consider the most important part of our work the restoration of the valuable historical objects we are lucky enough to have in our possession, and this will continue to be where the most funding is allocated. Of course, it would be wonderful to purchase new objects for the museum, but we simply don't have the space at the moment. Well, we do hope you enjoy your day today, but if you would like to learn more about our exhibits on display here, I suggest you come to one of the Saturday morning lectures which are given every month by one of our team of experts. Of course, you can pick up leaflets about the exhibits in most of the galleries too, but you'll only get a basic introduction from those. We're also working to update our website so that it provides more background on the exhibits, but that's still at the planning stage.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20 on page 4. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Okay, now let me just tell you a bit about what's on at the moment. Well, we're very well known for our collection of 18th century paintings, both oils and watercolours. Some of these are English landscapes and portraits, but we also have paintings by other European artists who were working during this period. If you're interested in art that's a bit nearer home, the Farnley collection is a set of drawings by Paul Farnley. He was born in Ireland, but he came to work here in the city in the early 20th century and then made it his home. He worked in a factory but spent his spare time drawing the buildings and urban landscape of the city, and his work has now been collected and displayed here. On a more practical note, we have a display of kitchen appliances which might interest you. These are the sorts of things you wouldn't normally expect to see in a museum. There's an electric potato peeler from the 1970s, which sold really well at the time, but no one's got one now. There are lots of other similar appliances which must have seemed like great ideas at the time, but which never took off. You might also like to visit the Fashion Gallery. This is an exhibition which is running for the next few weeks only and shows men's and women's fashion from 1900 to 2000, including some of the famous designers of the time. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, follow me over.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Part 3. You will hear a conversation between an art history student called Terence and his tutor about the student's plan for a class presentation. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
OK, Terence. Now, I've looked through your preliminary outline and notes for the presentation on the art of the Ife region in Africa. That's in Nigeria, right?
Yes, I'm concentrating on Ife sculptures from the 12th to the 15th century.
How did you get interested in that? I know there have been some recent articles in the journals about African sculpture.
Well, I've read most of those now, but initially I got my introduction to this at a special display at the City Museum a few years ago. I just happened to be there and saw these works and thought they were fantastic. And I even went to Nigeria last summer to see more of them.
I've seen the photos for your presentation, and I must say the sculptures are gorgeous portrayals of what appear to be kings and queens.
Yes, I decided to concentrate on those as they're the most typical. They're interesting because they're so naturalistic, unlike the abstract figures we often associate with African art. There's also a lovely sculpture of a mudfish and one of the scaly crocodile, but I didn't get very good pictures of those, so I won't spend long on them.
Right. So what was the city of Ife like when these works were made? It's on the Niger River, isn't it?
Yeah. The boat traffic's what made it a centre of commerce then, as it still is today. But nowadays it's better known as the home of a big university.
Speaking of modern-day Ife, tell me about your trip.
I was incredibly lucky to be able to get enough money to go. My parents encouraged me, but they couldn't afford to send me. I applied for a grant from the Arts Council, and in the end I got it. I also wrote a series of articles about my trip for the local newspaper, but I didn't get any money for that. I was just pleased to get them published.
And the highlight of the trip?
That had to be meeting a professor working on the site in Ife who had been a young boy when they first discovered the sculptures by accident at a building site in 1938. He had been working at the site. Of course, I also got to talk to lots of artists who are working there today, and I got to try my hand at making a little sculpture myself.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Well, let's see what you might do to improve what you're planning for your presentation.
About the sculptures themselves, I think I need to add as much as possible about the details of the way they were made. Of course, I can't add anything about the artists who made them, because nobody really knows anything about them.
All good points. And you've certainly said enough about what the sculptures depict, what the subjects are. That's well covered. But I'd make some bigger photos of them so you can clearly see the fine detail.
OK.
And I would limit my personal reactions to these works of art if I were you. I know you think they're fantastic.
You're right. I'll contain my enthusiasm. What about the section of the presentation which I call history? I'd like to go into more depth about the history of that whole area, in the countries around Nigeria.
That would make the presentation stronger, but I think you've covered the situation regarding the rulers of the country quite well, and you've got plenty already about what the Ife people were doing then and the way their society was structured. And in fact, I think you could cut out the bit about modern Nigerian history because it's not relevant.
I agree, that doesn't fit. But perhaps I should concentrate more on the religious beliefs, since all these sculptures do seem to have some kind of religious association.
Good. I can lend you a book on that.
Oh.
Now, probably the part the class will find most interesting is the report of your trip to Nigeria and the research you did there. So I gather you managed to use the university library in Ife?
Yes. As soon as I'd explained why I wanted the information, that was no problem. They couldn't have been more helpful. There were some interesting accounts of how the first sculptures were found and what happened to them, which I want to include. What struck me when I saw the sculptures in Nigeria is the extent to which 20th century European artists were influenced by them. But that's beyond the scope of my presentation, I think.
Yes. What about the sources of the materials they used? You don't mention that anywhere.
I didn't manage to find out much about that. I want to cover the theories about who the original sculptors were, though.
Yes, the idea that a lot of them may have been made by the same person. That's very interesting.
It is, isn't it? Right, well, thanks for all the advice. Now I think I need to work.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3. Part 4. You will hear part of a lecture on the subject of why living in the city may be better for the environment than living in rural areas. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're looking at urban migration, the movement of people migrating from outside cities into cities. I think it's easy to jump to the conclusion that a rural lifestyle is greener. However, recent studies have suggested otherwise. First of all, if we take the land area of the Earth, the proportion that cities take up is a mere 3%, and these same cities actually produce 30 to 40% of the carbon that is released into the atmosphere, a lower amount than the 60 to 70% from non-urban areas. Anyway, let's imagine that most people decide to migrate to the city. What kind of impact would that have? For a start, this movement of people from the countryside should lift the pressure of intensive agriculture from the land, allowing forests to regenerate. Another point in favour of urban migration is that it can be far more energy efficient if services are concentrated in the city, for example. This is true for electricity and, as you can imagine, water. Then, once you remember that rural communities are often very spread out, you can see yet another green reason to live in the city. Rural citizens rely on the car to make their journeys far more than city dwellers, who have other more environmentally friendly forms of transport that they can use, such as buses and trains. The journeys tend to be shorter too. Yet another point in favour of urban migration is the kind of recycling schemes that can only take place where the population is concentrated. Take, for instance, Seattle in the USA, where methane gas is being put to good use and is generating energy for the city. It's produced from the city's rubbish, which could not be collected so efficiently from rural areas. Now, another factor that threatens the environment is the growing world population. It's estimated that 75 million babies are now born every year, and in some countries the birth rate shows no signs of slowing down. Urban migration may provide an answer here. Now, in cities, one of the reasons that women tend to have fewer children is that they get married later and start their families later. And the reason for this is that it's far easier to find a job, and once you have one, to get a promotion. So yes, the focus isn't on bearing children. Well, it would be foolish to pretend that there are no downsides to urban living when clearly there are. The thing that critics often mention is the idea that migrants may end up losing their culture, although some studies have found the opposite is true. Rather than give up their traditions, people actually work hard to maintain them. More evident is the fact that compared to the lower rate that is observed in rural areas, we can see that there is more crime occurring in cities. There won't be many of us here today who can say we haven't been directly or indirectly affected by it. There's another issue that we have to deal with. So many cities, including our own, now suffer from high levels of pollution so that the air we breathe is far from pure. And another factor against the urban is greener idea is that urbanisation often drives a country's economy. Put simply, when there is greater wealth in society, more energy is consumed. One of the direct effects of a stronger economy, something that many citizens will now experience every day and may well find stressful, is the amount of traffic on the road, despite the other options we mentioned earlier. This is a problem that is not about to go away, although there are some solutions that could be considered. Let's have a look at some of those.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.